This is the third day of the July 88 7-day retreat. One question that came up is, what do you mean when you say that there is no practice or technique in this work? What do you mean when you say that this work, what you seem to be calling this work, has no practice or technique? Could you say more about that? When a little child goes out in the yard or for a walk in the street, a little child, not yet too controlled, too conditioned, too intimidated, too frightened. It just looks. Looks at everything that moves or doesn't move. I remember taking such walks with our small grandson, and it was utterly amazing what all was noticed, looked at, touched, put in the mouth, hung around. One time it was very snowy, cold, winter day. I took a walk around the block. It was getting dark and the street light was on. And near a street light, he just sat down. First feeling, we can't sit down. It's snow here and cold, let's go home. But he was sitting down, feeling the snow and the street light. I think he noticed the light, the spot of light there. And it was nice to sit down in that. Be in that. He didn't say that. Was he practicing attention? Every once in a while, some parents bring their little children here, maybe for an afternoon or a picnic. There was such a little boy here the other day, serious as could be. Not frightened or intimidated, but serious, looking at everyone and everything. Every once in a while he was pointing. And we were trying to give him things, but he didn't want it. He was just pointing. Was he? Did he have a technique for looking? We're not like little children anymore. We have gone through an incredible process of do's and don'ts. Hurry up, Make something of yourself. Get busy. You should do this, you shouldn't do that. Lots of rewards, lots of punishments. With resulting fears, anxieties, will, obstinacy. We have been manipulated and we have learned to manipulate each other. We feel wanting and lacking. We've learned to use the imagination to at least get in imagination what we want, or to remember what was pleasurable in imagination, to remember what was frightening and bring up the same kind of fear throughout the body, that this may happen again now or in the future. We've learned about time, that we have to get things done, that we have to become someone in time, become better, become important, outstanding. We have picked up innumerable images about ourselves according to what we were told we are or that we are not, or from models in books, funny comics, movies, plays, drama, novels. Lots of models to imitate, to want to be like them, have their experiences in imagination. And our perception is distorted, screened, or colored by all of that past education, conditioning, model taking, role taking, do's and don'ts, should and shouldn'ts. And we don't know how to look and listen anymore, freely, without any point of view. Without any compulsion, without any reward beckoning. Without any fear or desire. So, what we're asking here is it possible to begin looking at what is actually going on? Not within a new framework of rewards and punishments, promises, techniques, conditionings, but by not really knowing how to go about it, to become aware of how we go about things. We are wondering whether this massive conditioning, this conditioned consciousness which all we human beings share, whether that can come into awareness and not just push us and pull us, dominate us, attract us or repel us automatically, darkly, mechanically, unbeknownst to us who are acting in that way. That's what we're wondering. Because as one looks at one's conflicts with each other, on the smallest of levels in the family, at the place of work. Or in larger groups, on a larger global scale, the conflicts among tribes and nations, peoples, religious factions. Why can't we get along with each other? What ails us? What is it that we don't see about each other and about ourselves? Because ultimately everybody wants peace and getting along and friendship and love. And yet we don't live that way. We live in antagonism, conflict, anger, hatred, violence. The world over, since time immemorial. Why? Two people living together, sharing the same house. Two people working together, sharing the same workplace. Why can't we get along? Being alone with oneself, there's also conflict. One doesn't like oneself. One feels lonely, abandoned, wanting, needing, with clashing desires. Isn't it the most naturally urgent thing in the world, I'm wondering, to find out, to really investigate, inquire into how we live and think and interact, talk with each other, threaten each other, the sounds of our voices, to be in a fresh touch with that, the way we gesture, the way we interpret or project onto someone else. We may not even be aware that we're doing this, but can we begin to find out? Each one of us for ourselves, and if the other person or persons we're with are also interested to also do this together. Find out about each other in our relationship. By inquiring together, mutually, into the same thing. This enormous difficulties human beings have had since time immemorial to get along, to live peacefully, harmoniously, with lots of joy and energy. The energy as it is right now and has been seems to go either in striving to get things for oneself or one's group, or to destroy. So, coming back to a simple question, what do you mean that there is no practice or technique in this work? What is meant is, can one begin to look, feel, listen, sense freshly? Nothing complicated. Start very simply. In this room, if one is going to sit for a round, sitting down, we talked about it yesterday. How does one sit down? Is the mind already occupied with what one is going to do or get out of the sitting? Or is one thinking of the next meal? Where are the thoughts? What is one thinking? Not, I shouldn't be thinking anything or I should be attentive, but find out like a little child, what is happening? Is that so difficult? It is because of our habitual preoccupation with things we want and fear, or just, as one person said, most of my thoughts are pure triviality. Most of them. Just chattering on and on and on. Not to judge it, to listen to it, to be aware of it. That while the body moves in a certain way when sits down, the thought is miles away, projects a place miles away, or in the past or in the future. And we're also wondering, is it possible to be sitting down with care, noticing the movement of the joints, the leg or the chair, the feel and sound and taste of the whole thing? It's nothing spectacular, but it's the whole thing if one is there. Not as somebody who is being very attentive now, to see how that emerges around every corner, becoming somebody in the process. The meditator, the attentive person and so forth. To see it, so we learn about ourselves. How we cling to being somebody. All manufactured by thought. And the attachment to that thought of being somebody. And with that, the vulnerability to hurt or flattery. We talked at great length about that yesterday. So, sitting down, what is happening? Not, what can I do now? To notice the urge to do something. These commands which are programmed into this computer, which is the brain. Get busy. Do something productive, purposeful, useful. Something with a future. Just become aware of all the commands that are programmed into this computer as they happen. We do talk to ourselves. And some of them are very tacit, implicit. Not easy to notice, but when the mind is interested in it, one can come upon these implicit thoughts and commands. and counter commands. Do this and do that, and the two of them don't go along together. Well, we'll go into that later maybe. When we talk about anger, it has come up so much, people mentioning anger. So we will devote some time to looking at anger. But right now we're just sitting. And most of us having come or having been engaged or being engaged in some spiritual practice, what is called spiritual practice, have learned to do something with the breathing. To concentrate on the breathing, to follow the breathing or experience the breathing, maybe to start by counting. In some schools one counts from 1 to 10. I've read about a Tibetan school where one counts from 1 to 100,000. And starts at 1 if one has lost the count. I hope people don't think that we are laughing at the Tibetans. We're not. We're laughing at ourselves. Because with a practice like that, so rich, one's whole lifetime is guaranteed to be occupied. And of course, that's a preliminary practice. I'm feeling it out. We're feeling it out together. One always has something to look forward to, a more advanced practice. So one will never be lost because there will be a teacher who will assign the next practice. And that teacher knows how to get us from here to there. There meaning liberation, nirvana, enlightenment, paradise. Whatever the mind can conjure up, and the mind can conjure up anything. It is infinitely resourceful in creating illusion. So, the breathing lends itself marvelously for a practice because it's always there, has a certain regularity, and things happen when we concentrate on the breathing. It seems to somehow, at least at times, disconnect the thought process. And that's what is recommended, that's what we want. We want to be free, at least of the uncomfortable or unpleasurable thoughts. We don't mind the pleasurable ones. So one has learned to practice with the breathing, to concentrate upon it, to control it. Because there are such practices where one is taught to breathe deeply, regularly, and so forth. And there are feedbacks from this one. We've talked about one finds less bothered by the thoughts by concentrating on the breathing. The thoughts now just become a distraction which one can push aside by more concentration on the breath. But there's a struggle developing. I think we all know that if we've been through that. I must concentrate on the breathing, and everything else is a distraction which I must fight or cut off through concentrating on my counting. if one becomes proficient at it, and some people quickly become proficient at something like this, some people never do. We have different capacity with regard to concentrating, even though some of it can be learned by all of us. There may even be some feeling of warmth, heat through the energy that is generated through concentration. Concentrating the mind generates energy which is felt as heat. So one gets rewards, feedback. One is progressing. And the mind is becoming conditioned. The wanting something, whenever we want something, going for it conditions the mind. It becomes mechanical in trying to get what it wants and in all the methods that it uses to get there. One learns another method of controlling the mind. What we're asking now is, can there be awareness of the breathing which is there, not as a practice, not as a concentration technique, but simply being aware of what's there. And breathing is one of the things that is very noticeable as one sits quietly. Not breathe according to Tibetan or Zen or Vipassana or whatever techniques, but find out what this is, which is occurring miraculously in the human organism, not just in the human organism. All life breathes and exhales. And we're part of that life. And this is happening. Not through any will of ours. We can impose our will and control it. But that's a petty affair. To just wonder, what is this? And listen to it with fresh ears. Feel it newly, not anchored in any tradition while doing that. Because it needs none. It happens without any tradition. We may already have a certain model in mind of how this breathing proceeds, and have the model, the picture of the nose, and then the breath goes somewhere. Maybe we know the tube, the name of it. We feel usually good when we know those names. And then lungs filling with air. One may have that idea, maybe have looked into anatomy books, have studied that maybe, and be aware now, visually. And then one is somewhat familiar that there is a diaphragm which may be going in and out or up and down. And so following the breath may mean one is sort of visually imagining, according to a remembered model, how this breath proceeds. It's a very, very limited thing. It's not the openness, the innocency of awareness, wondering what is going on. And putting aside, if possible, what one knows about it, what one has practiced about it, what the famous masters or patriarchs have said about it. And just going with it. wherever it's felt. One may be surprised to find there's nowhere throughout this body where it's not. But not to now make an idea of that, I must feel it throughout my body. See how the mind works if that's what took place. And be modest about it, just feel how it is, without any comparison, without any standards. My breath should be deeper, it shouldn't be shallow. It should be regular. I'm so erratic. And as these comments do happen, to take note of them, as one takes note of this magical phenomenon called breathing. By magical, I mean incomprehensible. No matter how many volumes of books may have been written about it. That it occurs at all is not explainable. So, that's one thing that's happening. Breathing. Can there be simple awareness of it? One person said, I noticed that as I'm observing the breathing, I'm influencing it immediately. It changes. It doesn't seem to have what it had before it was observed. Maybe we didn't talk about it, but maybe that quality of unself-consciousness, of naturalness. So why is the breathing affected the moment one is observing it? Why does it change? That's interesting to find and to find out about. One can question whether there are subtle feelings of how it should be, or past controls that have been practiced. Not, it shouldn't be like that, but it is like this. Let's watch it. And why? Maybe one can discover more about what goes on in the computer. Just expose it, that's enough. Throw light on it, that's enough. Maybe there be a moment when there's awareness and the breath is not affected. It just proceeds quietly and calmly, without the feeling it should be different, it should be otherwise. And that only happens when we don't want anything of it, or of ourselves, or of this life. The next question is one becoming so engrossed with observing the breathing that it becomes exclusive again? Or is the mind open to also hear the birds, the sounds of people moving? One One finds out, one asks the question if it comes up, and then quiet. A question such as, is one exclusively listening to the breathing, or is the mind open to hear whatever other things are going on? Such a question, if it comes up, needs not to be repeated over and over. If one is really seriously wondering about this, then one has to be quiet, doesn't one, to listen. Questions can become vehicles of tranquilizing the mind or concentrating the mind by repeating them over and over. But we're not interested. Maybe you are. I'm not interested in tranquilizing the mind, but finding out how it operates. So a question comes up, and then listen. In the light of the question, what's happening? People say, yes, the birds, the sound of the traffic, it's all there, but there is definitely a feeling of somebody who hears all of that and who is separate from it all. This deeply ingrained, deep-seated conviction and feeling that there is a separate entity, separate from what is perceived, often feeling isolated from it, deeply divided from it, at a distance. What is that entity? Or is there such a thing? One can question it. One person mentioned hearing the birds, then the breathing, then the traffic, then the sound of somebody moving, one thing after another. And the question was, do these things happen sequentially, or don't they happen all together? If they happen all together, why don't we hear it that way? What separates and fragments this world in which we live? And separates us from it in addition. Because as we perceive people, things around us, it's all in categories, in groups, in entities, all labeled, known, divided from each other. What brings that about? One doesn't have to take that for granted that this is so. We do label things, don't we? It happens when we're very little. We're already told this is this and this is that. Becomes in the beginning it's fun. There's tremendous amount of reward when the child can give the name to a thing. Parents are delighted. We're not saying there's anything wrong with giving labels to things. But there's a great reward in it, in knowing the name of something. That's what school is mostly about, knowing names of things. Get more complicated when it comes to chemistry, knowing formulas, mathematical formulas. So in saying this is a bird, this is a car, that's somebody moving, this is my breath, with that it appears as though everything was separate. But that's just thought operating. Thought is a device, it's an instrument. But it cannot tell us what things really are. It's limited. Do you see that? Just because thought proceeds sequentially and names things sequentially does not mean that things happen sequentially and are separate from each other as each name is separate from the next. And when there is listening without labeling, without thinking this is a bird and this is an airplane and this is the wind, when the listening is so full, so whole, then there is no separation of one thing from another. All happens at the same time. And no entity separate from it. Because the labeler, the observer, the knower is quiet. That part of the brain is quiet, it's in abeyance. And therefore, no division, no conflict with what is perceived. It is seen for what it is. Not memory and thought and conditioning saying it should be otherwise. It shouldn't be so. I wish it was different. That's our training, which is all stored in the computer, always ready to be triggered, to operate, and to change the real world into a thought-dominated world. Thought and habit-dominated world. Can one observe this for oneself so one is not fooled by the mistakes that thought inevitably makes? That's the big question. We are trained also to think we can't do these things alone. We have to read books of wise people, learn them by heart, or follow what somebody else says. That's our training. But it is not so. We don't have to learn that way. We can learn by looking and finding out by ourselves. It's possible. No matter how heavily conditioned we are, it's possible to become aware of it. How, I don't know. There's no how. It just happens. When one is really deeply concerned with the way we live, in our room together, in our house together, at our place of work together, or in this whole world together. Live divided and in conflict and violence. and wondering whether this, even though it has been like this since time immemorial, has to continue today or tomorrow. Any time when it's really seized by a problem, when one sees the problem and is grabbed, seized by it, one doesn't know the solution, but one wants to understand the problem. Then, as if magical, the energy is there to look, to find out, to talk with others, to find people who are also interested, who will talk with one, maybe point things out. There's another unexplainable phenomenon, but it happens. There are other lines of communication with each other, human minds with each other, than have been explained or described or are known. Not to give way to magical thinking or now creating new illusions. What is important is to want to find out, how do I live? How do I think? How do I relate? Why? Not looking for explanations and books and wise teachers with a lot of knowledge, but looking here in this laboratory, which is myself, from moment to moment. Aware of a reaction, aware of the sound of my voice. Aware of how I interpret what the other person says, how I get hurt, how I close off, how I defend. And maybe pay back tomorrow when the opportunity arises. Not consciously, but it happens. And one can observe it not just in oneself, but in each other and in the little children. Little children get hurt, I don't know how many times a day. I don't mean by falling down and shinning a knee, but by parents telling them what they are, how they should be, what they shouldn't do, that they're bad, punishing them. Humiliating them, exerting power over them. And we've all been these little children, all of us. And we still are. A little child that's been hurt or humiliated, his brain or her brain registers that. It's remembered, consciously or unconsciously. And then when the opportunity arises, it hurts the parent. Or it does what it was prevented from doing, tries it again when parent doesn't look or is too fatigued to go over the whole thing again. But by these little revenges that happen so early, the matter is not finished. It's not out of this world. It's repeated endlessly. I'm not stating a theory. I'm stating what is observable. We're still avenging early hurts and humiliations in other people who are seen to be in that function of the parent or the controller, the dominator, the powerful one. I'm just using one example, in the revenging or paying back, but one can observe the whole spectrum, the whole panorama of responses, which are early responses, unfinished, unsatisfied business, still working itself out, and will keep working itself out unless something entirely new happens, which is insight into this whole thing. Not knowledge about it. We do find great satisfaction in reading explanations, reading psychological works about which explain how we come to be as we are, and as a real satisfaction in understanding some of these mysterious things. But the mysterious behavior doesn't change, or changes very little. If something is to really radically change or drop off, there has to be a different functioning altogether of the brain, which is not knowledge, is not memory, not more thought, but insight. Seeing what is going on at this instant. Without anything operating, no interference, no fear, no desire, no expectation. Just this is how it is. And then, whatever has been going on changes. It doesn't have to continue. Because something has been radically changed. If you say, well, what is this insight? I don't really know. All that can be said that it is not connected with knowledge or memory or intention or will. And that it comes on its own. But seems to be connected with this total concern about how we live together and alone. And a passion for finding out the truth. Not illusion, not engaging in gratifying illusions, but finding out the truth about oneself and this world and each other and this moment and the tree or the song of a bird. Not what I think it is, but what is it really? And for that, there's no technique. That's clear, isn't it? It's the beauty of it, because if there were a technique, the mind would immediately be conditioned again to do something. And how can it be free to see and discover if it's conditioned and attached to something, namely the technique, and the one who gives out the technique, or the tradition which has developed this technique, when there is any kind of attachment of this kind, the mind is not free to look. It's bound at least in one spot at which it cannot look. And that's not freedom. It's not clarity. And it's not impossible to be aware. It happens off and on to us all the time, but it's immediately overlaid with thinking about what was seen and judging it. Judging oneself, putting oneself down, or building oneself up. Wanting to keep that precious moment, hold on to it, at which moment it's entirely gone. So can there be awareness of that? It happens to many people, realizing the moment I want to keep this, it's gone. It's a precious insight. But what we usually do is we mourn that fact that it's gone, rather than seeing, yeah, this is so. This is a fact. It is absolutely so. The moment thought wants to make a memory, or does make a memory of it, and bring it up again and hold it, then it's memory, but not that moment of freedom. There's no occasion for grieving. But we're so run by habits. But we can see these habits and question every one of them. So then, next time something is seen, and then comes the habit of wanting to hold on to it, and awareness of it, and finished. No mourning about it. These things, as they're seen and understood for how wasteful they are, how limiting, they drop off. Because awareness is intelligent. Not the intelligence of thinking, but the intelligence of seeing, and not continuing to engage in what leads nowhere except into trouble. So coming back to, we won't come back to anything. Time went so fast. Still be many more talks. And please, what is not clear or wants to be looked at more, bring it to meeting. And then I'll come back in the talk. So we're all working in this together. In spite of what seems so depressing, what one sees in oneself, there is an immense joy in discovery. We will end here for today.